right. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Um, Reports of my demise have been greatly overstated. For those who were saying that I haven't been around in a while, although it is true, I have not been around in a while. We will be in Jude verses 5 through 10 tonight. I listened to the study last week, um, and as has been pointed out before, Jude is pretty dense with content. So it's a small book, um, but we will be taking some time in these verses here because what he does is he references a lot of things. Do you guys remember who Winged said the letter of Jude was most likely written to? Yes, yes, Jewish audience. Thank you. That kind of worked. The brackets were close. Um, yeah. Why? Why? How can we tell that it was written to a Jewish audience?
There were a couple of ways. Let's see who remembers.
Those of you who were typing, um, because he references all sorts of Jewish scriptures and Jewish teachings. You are correct. Good job, guys. um, the Since you guys did so well with those questions, I'm gonna ask a few more. Um, who was what was? So we know who wrote Jude, right? One would hope Jude. Okay, good. Um, is Jude related to anybody that we know in the New Testament? Ask stupid questions, get stupid answers. There we go. Yeah. Bob says brother of James. There we go. Yes. He identifies himself as the brother of James, servant of Jesus. It was also the brother of Jesus or half brother of Jesus, if you want to be like Baptist, super precise in your wording. Um, but yes, yep, good, excellent. Okay, what are um, what are some themes in the book of Jude? What is it written to address? Yeah, good. Those of you who have been with us in the New Testament for a while, um, you're probably like getting tired of hearing this theme, but it's also written to address false teaching in the church, kind of a thing in the New Testament. Um, any guesses as to what kind of false teaching?
I touched on that
Yes, indeed, all kinds of guesses. Yep. Gnosticism is a popular answer. Antinomianism is more likely. Everybody's going, what is he saying? Is he making up words? What is antinomianism? Yeah, exactly. Literally means against the law. So it's kind of an everything goes sort of theology. It's the opposite of the Judaizers, right? So he's writing to address yeah, exactly. He's writing to address an opposite heresy of the Judaizers. Why do we mention the Judaizers? Because they've been spending a lot of time in Paul, and Paul really goes hard after the Judaizers in Galatians and Romans and some of the other books. Okay. Judaizers teaching that you need to be an adherent to the law, keep all the Jewish law in order to be saved. So Jesus plus works. Um, whereas Jude is writing to address most likely a false teaching that says, "Hey, do whatever you want, anything, go for it. It's all you, man." Um, so C.S. Lewis once mentioned that uh, errors come in pairs, opposite pairs. Yeah. So if the truth is the straight and narrow path down the middle of the road, right? You got ditches on either side. You have Judaism, or try that again. The Judaizers are the error in one ditch. The antinomians are the errors on the opposite side of the road, in the other ditch, right? So it is a rather serious error, as Jude will get into. Um, yeah, so that's kind of what it's about. All right, verses 5 through 7. Can I volunteer to read verses 5 through 7? Go for it.
I will therefore put you in remembrance, though ye once knew this, how that the Lord having saved the people out of the land of Egypt, afterward destroyed them that believed not. And the angels which kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation, he hath reserved in everlasting chains under darkness unto the judgment of the great, even as Sodom and Gomorrah, and the cities about them, in like manner, giving themselves over to fornication, and going after the strange flesh, are set forth for an example, suffering the vengeance of eternal fire.
Thank you. All right, so there is, as Winged put in the text, a decent amount of controversy in this passage tonight. Last time we did Jude, I stuck him with this passage.
Yes, you did.
I was looking through my notes, and we did opposite sections
Mm-hmm.
last time.
Yeah.
So yay for that. When we do studies, guys, we like to do as much work as humanly possible. So we are enjoying ourselves greatly in this study. Yeah. So uh, the I am going to try and steer clear of some of this controversy. I'll mention it so you guys are aware of what controversies are. But we're going to focus on the main things because honestly, some of the stuff it just doesn't affect the meaning that much. Um, yeah. So, verse 5. And I want to remind you, although you once fully knew it. Hmm. So, what is he saying there? I want to remind you, although you once fully knew it. Yes, exactly. There's such a thing as willful ignorance. Yep. He's saying, you guys are you forgetting what you know? Now, this is something if he's writing to a Jewish audience. Um, that would definitely be kind of a sarcasm thing. I don't know if you forgot. They wouldn't have forgotten. They know these stories in the Old Testament very, very well. Um, so, but what he's saying is you're living in a way, you're believing in a way that has functionally forgotten these things. The willful ignorance, the making the decision to overlook it. So he's going to remind them of a few things. He pulls out 3 examples here. Um, 3 examples of sin and judgment. What's the first example? to save the people out of Egypt, like Bob says. This is a fundamental element of not just Jewish faith, but Jewish culture. The Jewish people were in bondage in Egypt, and God, through a series of miracles and signs and works and plagues, delivered them from the hand of the Pharaoh, right? Delivered them from Egypt. So he saved the people out of the land of Egypt. Then it says, afterward destroyed those who did not believe. What happened there? Why did he save the people and then destroy them?
Excessive naughtiness. Sorry.
Go ahead, Cass.
It's a long story, but in the end, the straw that broke the camel's back was when they got to the promised land and told them to go in and take it, and they wouldn't go. And it's even more complicated than that. But so they were sentenced to wander in the wilderness for 40 years until that generation died.
Yep, exactly. With the exception of Joshua and Caleb. So the people get to the promised land. They send in 12 spies, Joshua and Caleb among them. All the spies come back. 10 say, this is a bad situation. We got to get out. We can't deal with this. These people are way, way better armed and way better equipped than we're prepared to deal with. 2 spies, Caleb and Joshua, say, nope, you guys are forgetting who God is, right? You're forgetting what we just saw, what we saw him do to Egypt, the superpower of the Middle East, of the ancient Near East at the time, right? He has delivered them from the superpower, and the people have already forgotten that. People choose to be willfully ignorant, to forget what God has done for them, and to say, we can't do this. So God says, okay, fine, you don't want to go in, then you won't. And they're sentenced to wander in the wilderness until that generation dies off, with the exception of Joshua and Caleb. People go, you know what, we made a mistake. They try to go into the promised land anyways, and a bunch of them get killed. So that it's a story that's well known to the Jewish audience. So even though God saved them, that did not stop God from punishing their disobedience, right? So that's something interesting about that story. The next story that he references. And the angels who did not stay within their own position of authority, but left their proper dwelling, he has kept in eternal chains under gloomy darkness until the judgment of the great day. What is being talked about here? Yes. Yep, so it's 2 references. The Book of Enoch is the intertestamental book referenced, being a book written between the Old Testament and the New. It ties into Jewish tradition about the Genesis 6 story. So one of the things I learned when I was in Israel is there is a lot of Jewish tradition that fleshes out stories in the Torah. So stories in the Old Testament, as we would say. There's lots of traditions that kind of spring up around this that give them different ways of interpreting it. A lot of these traditions were written down in the 300s AD. Kind of, you can read it's called the Mishnah. It's actually very interesting, and explains some things about where we get some tradition in our backstory and stuff. But so some of these stories would be fleshed out throughout the tradition. So in Genesis 6, you get the Book of Enoch talks about this more in depth, but really it's referencing the story in Genesis 6 where it says the sons of God came down and knew the daughters of man. Very kind of strange. And what the tradition that's being referenced says is that these were fallen angels that came down and mated with human women, and then were condemned to hell, and that was one of the reasons why God destroyed the world with the flood. Okay, it's not a it's not a huge thing in the Genesis story. It gets to be a bigger thing in Enoch and in the tradition, but this is what's being referenced here. So the angels did not keep their proper place. Word for proper place being archon, so archangels or archangels, angels with certain authority. They did not keep their proper place. They didn't stay within the bounds of their authority. They are bound up and kept for judgment. Okay, so they did not keep the proper place. So now God is keeping them in a place for judgment. And that's the story of them being kept for judgment is in the book of Enoch. They get bound up, thrown in a pit somewhere in the desert, and then they're left there for until the judgment day. Okay, so that's kind of an interesting thing. We'll talk about how that ties back in here in a moment. What's the final example we have here? The final story that's referenced. Excellent use of the word flamboyant. Yeah, Sodom and Gomorrah. Sodom and Gomorrah, as we know, another Genesis story. They were destroyed for immorality. Um, in other places in the Bible, it says they were destroyed for lack of charity to foreigners and the disenfranchised in society. Here it says they were destroyed because of sexual immorality and unnatural desire, is how the ESV translates it. There's as you would imagine, a decent amount of controversy as to what that's talking about there. Although I think unnatural desire, by doing that, the ESV is referring to the Romans section, Romans 1, um, about homosexuality there. In this particular way, this is translated. I think that's a fairly decent. It's a bit of an interpretation, but it's not a bad one. I do think that the language used here is meant to reference Romans 1, although we know that that's not the only reason why Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed, because there's other parts in um, the prophets in the Old Testament where they talk about um, lack of charity to travelers and foreigners and widows things. Yep. But not having an abundance of mercy on the poor. Exactly. Yep. So specifically here, the sexual immorality is being referenced. Um, but again, that's not the only reason why. There were other reasons elsewhere. Okay. Is there a reason, first of all, is there a reason why sexual immorality is mentioned here? Why that's the if there are multiple reasons why Sodom and Gomorrah are being destroyed, is there a reason why sexual immorality is pulled out here? Yep, I think Kess has a good read on this. Yep. if these false teachers were antinomians, which I think there's pretty good evidence in this letter for that, um, that sort of theology is generally motivated or tied to um, sexual immorality. I don't know about you guys. I've seen that. I've seen that in churches. I've seen that at college. Um, I've seen that in various ministries. So it doesn't surprise me much, and it probably doesn't surprise you guys any either. It also refers back to. Um, it's interesting. It ties kind of into the angels sleeping with uh, women in the second example. In Sodom and Gomorrah, you have kind of the opposite. You have you have you have guys trying to rape angels, right? So it's kind of the same thing in reverse. That's what you have in the Genesis story. So, um, it's yeah, every nobody is staying within the proper boundaries um of what God intends, right? Within these stories. Nobody is respecting God's authority, and they're just going to do whatever they feel like, right? So, Sodom and Gomorrah then are destroyed by eternal fire, as we know. It's also interesting to note Sodom and Gomorrah were located kind of in an outcropping in the Dead Sea. When I was in, I mentioned earlier about how um, the settings that are mentioned are important. That was one of the things I took away from my trip to Israel. The Dead Sea was the hottest place I've ever been. It was an air temp of 118 degrees with a humidity level of 90%. It was miserable. It was the least favorite place that I went while I was there. um, and that is not uncommon weather for that particular part of the planet. What's really interesting is it's less so now, but back in the day, that used to be a source of bitumen and tar. Bitumen being an extremely flammable substance. So that would start burning and you couldn't put it out. So when Sodom and Gomorrah are destroyed by fire and brimstone, um, there's some people who theorize that they were actually involved in like the bitumen industry. So they would have gone up like the proverbial Roman candle, um, and that sort of blaze in that hot of an area. Um, it would have been something that the people who were reading this letter would be familiar with and would be able to kind of visually see as um, uh, as a pretty powerful example, thing that they would be able to relate to quickly because it's not that far from Jerusalem. It's about a day's walk. So yeah, probably kept burning for a while too. Exactly. Yep. So not just a hypothetical thing, but something that they would have been familiar with. They would have known where the region where this was. They would have seen um, some of the things there and known how unpleasant it is there. So they're there to serve as an example by burning in eternal fire, right? Um, Obviously, you can think about the eternal elements of that, but also just a fire that is very hot and doesn't go out would be something that they would have seen in that region as well, from the bitumen tar, those sorts of things. Not a pleasant area. Okay, so 3 examples. We talked about some of the themes, so these tie together. People not staying in their proper place, people ignoring and disrespecting the ordinance of God, and just kind of assuming that that God's laws don't apply to them. Forgetting willful ignorance, if you will, forgetting who God is. So, okay, um, verses 8 through 10. We'll let Jude draw some parallels here. Can I have volunteer to read verses 8 through 10? Go ahead.
Yet in like manner, these people also, relying on their dreams, defile the flesh, reject authority, and blaspheme the glorious ones. But when the archangel Michael, contending with the devil, was disputing about the body of Moses, he did not presume to pronounce a blasphemous judgment, but said, The Lord rebuke you. But these people blaspheme all that they do not understand, and they are destroyed by all that they, like unreasoning animals, understand instinctively.
Some kind words for the false teachers here. Again, more evidence for them being antinomian, kind of do whatever you want sort of people. We'll get to that in a moment. All right, so he goes and lists some sins, some actions of these false teachers. In like manner, these people also do what? What are three things that he lists here? Yep. Joe and Scribe both have it. Good. Okay, first one. Defile the flesh. Interestingly, they defile the flesh by what? Relying upon their dreams. What does that mean? Go ahead, Cass. Very good, Bob. Go ahead, Cass.
That sounds like people who have visions and revelations, and not to. There are good people who say this and do it in a right way, but people who say they've had a word from the Lord.
So that's exactly what it is. Yep. It's people who are claiming that they had a vision from the Lord to justify something. That's a couple things. That's taking the name of the Lord in vain, right? Taking the name of the Lord in vain, that wouldn't be understood as swearing, although that would be part of it in the Old Testament. But instead, much more seriously, using the Lord's name to push your agenda, trying to co-opt his authority, which is what these guys are doing. It's okay. We can do this because I had a vision last night. I had a dream where God told me it's okay. I had a back in the olden days in CC. My brother was also I was the leader of the studies here in CC, and my brother was the leader of the studies over in SOC. And we'd get people bounce between us, hoping for answers that they wanted. So one of these guys asked me a question. I said, "No, you can't." He's like, "Would this be a sin?" I said, "Yes." He goes, "Well, okay. Are you sure?" I read him the verse. I'm like, "I don't know, man. It seems pretty sure to me." So he didn't so much like that. So he bounced over to SOC to talk to my brother. Right? Making my brother after one of the studies, and he goes, "Hey, is this a sin?" And my brother, not knowing it, talked to me. He goes, "Yep." Gives him the verse, and he goes, "Okay, but what if I prayed about it?" My brother goes, "That's great. Definitely pray, but still a sin." Yeah. He goes, "Okay, but what if I prayed about it and God gave me a vision saying it's not a sin?" My brother goes, "Yeah, so that would still be a sin?" Because God's not going to contradict himself, right? And if he says that don't do this, and you go and do it, like if you get another vision or something, we know that's not from God, right? Why do we know that? Because we just got done with the Galatians study, guys. And what did Paul say at the beginning of Galatians about dreams and angels and things that come to you in visions that contradict what the Bible says? He says, if anyone contradicts the gospel, right? If anybody contradicts the word of God, a vision, dreams, angels, let them be accursed, right? He says, let me rephrase that. He doesn't say let them be accursed. In the original Greek, he says, damn them to hell. Let them be damned. Damn those people, right? That's what he says about the people who are saying, oh no, it's okay. It's cool. It's cool. I had a vision. God told me to do this. It's good to go. Even if an angel comes and tells you something that God has told you not to do, that's still not good to go. Okay. So these guys are doing that. They are relying upon dreams to defile the flesh. They're using dreams, visions. They're trying to co-opt God's authority to justify sin. Sometimes these people are cult members. I've dealt with those. It was a big deal in college. One year I can tell you guys about later if you want to hear about it. Sometimes they're just people in the church, but I think we all we all know people like this, or I've heard of them, or whatever. I think we know that's wrong. Okay, so they defile the flesh. They reject authority. What kind of authority do they reject? Some good answers in the chat. Go ahead, Kess.
Well, yeah, they're right. God's first and foremost, but they're also going around the teaching structure of the church, at least initially.
Yep. Yeah. So there's a whole ton of debate about this. People go back and forth between gods, the apostles, and ironically angels, because for some reason Jude keeps tying in angels, both not fallen and fallen, into this. I think the answer doesn't. There was a one of the guys who spoke to us when we were in Israel was a rabbi, and he was trying to get us to understand kind of Second Temple period, so this time Jewish mindset. And he was like, "There's the Bible is truth. Each word of it is truth, but there's 70 elements, 70 different ways of looking at each truth. The idea being, it's this thing for sure thing. There's probably multiple layers of meaning here that you could unpack. And if Jude is speaking to a Jewish audience, he's speaking in that Jewish way. So when he says they reject authority, I think all those answers are valid. God's primarily. I think that they are also. There's probably they're to an extent they're not respecting authority of angels, right? It seems like they're claiming that angels told them this, or some sort of spiritual authority told them this. So they're certainly not respecting spiritual authority and giving the spiritual one the respect it deserves. And they're certainly not respecting the apostles' authority either, right? Because they're saying, "Nah, it's good. I've got this vision for that says that Paul and Jude and James they're wrong, so it's good to go. We can do whatever we want here." So there's most likely layers of authority they're rejecting here. Yeah, bypassing admin. Yeah, it's true. Yeah, I think the admins of the channel can think of a few names that have done this on a human level in the last few months. Yeah. And the third one's weird, right? Blaspheme the glorious ones. What's being talked about there? The chat grows tired of Socratic questioning. Yeah, Scribe's right. Good angels or bad angels, though?
No, you're not allowed.
Okay, this is part of the controversy. again, layers of meaning, right?
I was gonna say I'm gonna stop him there before that trick question gets any further.
Layers of meaning. So what's interesting about this, if you view it in light of verse 9, it could mean both, because it says in verse 9, the example to use the archangel Michael, archangel, so he's staying in his proper place, right? He's got authority. We talked about that earlier. Michael, contending with the devil, was disputing about the body of Moses. We go, wait a minute. Squints at the Bible. I don't remember reading that in Genesis. That's because you didn't. Um, this is a story from a book that is referenced by several early church fathers, called either, depending on how you want to look at it, the Ascension of Moses or the Passing of Moses. The Ascension of Moses being the most common. There's a story in there about how Michael and Satan are fighting over the body of Moses. We go, well, that sounds really interesting. Okay, yeah, okay, it's interesting. You can look up in your time. Honestly, it does. That particular part of the story doesn't matter too much to our context here. However, if we look at it, he was saying they were disputing over the body of Moses, and it says Michael did not presume to pronounce a blasphemous judgment, but said, "The Lord rebuke you." What is going on here? Okay, so lots of different ways of looking at this, lots of different controversies about it. Here's what's most likely happening. Okay. Michael is not overstepping the bounds of his authority by insulting or slandering Satan. He is instead staying within his proper authority, his proper arc, if you will, and saying, "Hey, the Lord rebuke you." Right? He's doing his job. He's not going to go and just get into a insult match with Satan. So he's saying, if Michael, who's an archangel, right? Tradition saying he's the most powerful of the angels. He's the other than Satan, he's the commander of the Lord's army. If he isn't, in a sense, slandering or speaking lightly about Satan, right? Our enemy, the bad guy. What are these guys doing? These false teachers, when they speak lightly, when they slander, when they take in vain or blaspheme, when they try to co-opt the authority of angels and or demons, right? He's saying they have no idea what they're dealing with, what they're doing. They have left their proper place. They have they've gone so far from what God has commanded, the place that God has put for them, that they are about to get absolutely burned and destroyed by what they're dealing with. Yep. So Kessa mentions the story of the dude with the 7 sons, the Jewish exorcist, right, in Acts, who tried to use Paul and Jesus' name to cast out demons. And the demon essentially says, okay, I know who Paul is, and I know who Jesus is, but who are you? And then beats him up, right? So yeah, beats the guys up, exactly. So it's these guys who are trying to kind of just use the spiritual realm to push themselves up. They're playing with fire, right? They have no idea what they're getting involved in. These guys are saying, "Oh, no, I had a vision. It's cool. Talk to the angel. It's cool." The demons most likely come into play here. To go, okay, that's I get why they're co-opting God's authority and the angel's authority. What's going on with the demons, right? Okay, so there's whenever we read about idolatry in the Old Testament, ever wonder how the Israelites keep falling into idolatry? What's going on here? Um, Lots of idolatry in ancient Near East had to do with sex. Okay, what you would do is you would go and, in order to get on the good side of the gods, you would sleep with temple prostitutes. Okay. And I go, oh, okay, that probably makes more sense as to why idolatry was such a temptation. Then got it. Yeah. So there is more than likely um, something with that going on here. It's quite possible I might be reading too far into this. but it seems possible to me that they're saying, hey, it's cool, we can sleep with these temple prostitutes because saved by faith, not by works, right? It's all good. And I had a vision from God saying it's good to go. Okay. And what Jude is saying here is these guys have no idea what they're dealing with here. They're blaspheming God. They're blaspheming the glorious ones, right? Angels, demons. They're not taking these things seriously. They're not giving them proper respect and fear that we should. Not that we need to be afraid of them as Christians, but we should give this a healthy respect because we know that these things are real. And they are using these things to try and get what they want. To um, as as James or Jude, oh, James, sorry, says here, they're like unreasoning animals, right? They're giving into their animal instincts. So verse 10, these people blaspheme all that they do not understand, and they are destroyed by all that they, like unreasoning animals, understand instinctively. What a great way of putting that. So they blaspheme, they slander all these things that they don't understand. He's saying they don't have a clue what they're talking about. And they're destroyed by the things that they do understand, like unreasoning animals, right? What do they understand? They understand their animal impulses. Um, their animal desires, their urges, right? Their belly and below, we'll say. that's what's driving them, right? Not their mind, their spirit, but instead just their desires, the same desires that they share with the animals, right? Okay, so that's Jude. Um, first of all, any questions and things you guys want to add from those last 3 verses before I start asking questions? Okay, I'll ask the questions then. Like I said, I think that we know that this is still a thing today, right? Um, I so when I was in college, I think I've told this story before. There was some really weird cult stuff that happened my sophomore year. I wasn't involved with it, but I had friends who were. There was some really weird theology, some stuff that these people were claiming to get visions and visitations and spiritual experiences that were supposed to prove this one teacher's theology. Not a teacher from college, but somebody who came to like lead Bible studies and stuff at the college. A buddy of mine launched what he called Operation Berean. The guy's a theology teacher now, by the way. Um, did some investigation and got this false teacher kicked off of college grounds. Um, when he did that, um, much to his and my, a couple of people who were involved in it, our dismay, um, a bunch of people left the college and said, "No, we're going to go follow this teacher to a cult, kind of create our own little convent thing in California." And that went as badly as you would imagine it going. Um, lots of lots of weird um, abusive stuff came bubbling to the surface in that 2-3 years later. Um, what was really scary to me about that situation was there were people who left to follow that guy that should know better. You look at it, it's like, okay, the people who are following him probably aren't very smart, and that was not the case. There were honor students. There were people there who were much better students than me who followed that guy. There were sports players. There were artists. There were dancers. There were theology students. And what was startling to me was um, the, the fact that there wasn't necessarily one personality type or thing that followed. It was people who just got taken in. Um, either willfully or otherwise, by this guy's teachings and what they thought they experienced. And it taught me it was an interesting lesson for me, because it was humbling, right? Because I look at most people, I'm like, whoa, like if they can follow that crap, that could happen to anybody, right? That could happen to me. Um, and it was also interesting because I think it showed the value of, well, not just the value, but the power of social connections, right? These teachers created a very tight knit community that I think some of these people were really wanting. Um, and it was pretty scary. So I think that you see some of that here as well, right? So those obviously there's parallels. I mean, the people in that community claim that they were having visions. They claim they're having visitations from angels and spirits and things like that to justify their actions. Because when we countered them, when we said, "Hey, like this is against the Bible," said, "No, no, no, it's just your way of looking at the Bible, man. Like I had this vision that opened up this new way of looking at it to me." It's like, oh boy, okay, um, that's not okay. Um, but you can see where people would like where that becomes difficult to counter, and that's what Jude is saying here is these guys are dealing in things that they don't understand and they're going to get burned by it. That's what happened, right? Yeah, it's more exciting. Yeah, yeah. So, we can see the danger in this, right? We can see where people would get taken in by this, where there'd be false teachers that do it. What do we take? How do we apply this week? Assuming that none of us run into a cult in creation like that, which is, to be fair, I haven't encountered one of those in a while. So assuming that we don't encounter something like that, if you do, you can obviously apply this. But how are we going to apply these verses outside of that? Kess has got it. Explain yourself, Kess.
Dorothy Sayers talked about how when um, she wasn't a pastor, but theology was very important to her, and she couldn't believe how many people within the church, let alone outside of it, did not understand the fundamentals of the Christian faith. And so she talked about those things a lot. And she said every postman's visit brought a rich crop of heresies in the form of letters. And most of them are very common thinking. Um, like, and I can find the passage later, but she gave a few examples, like people thinking that um, suffering for all mankind was so easy for Jesus because he was God, or that would mean that he didn't have a reasonable soul, which is part of the creeds, or that he wasn't really man, so he wasn't tempted by everything we're tempted by, etc. So, and we tend to think those kinds of thoughts every day. It's really, really easy.
Yeah, exactly. So Kess mentioned the phrase willful ignorance earlier too, and that uh, that's part of the people who bought into this cult. I do think there was some of that. That's certainly what's going on here. But how many times do we do that in our own lives, right? How many times do we choose to ignore or to forget or to misinterpret um, the Bible to justify our own sinfulness? How many times do we do what these false teachers do and forget the holiness and the judgment of God, right? I know I do. If I'm being in moments of honesty, I'll tell you I do probably multiple times a day. Um, yeah, it's okay. This is God understands. I'll ask for forgiveness later. Not taking the word of God the spiritual things seriously, right? How many times do we, like unreasoning animals, kind of follow what we understand instinctively instead of what we know to be true from what God has told us? Yeah, probably more often than we realize. Yeah, exactly, Bob. So we've spent a lot of time in Romans and Galatians lately, um, talking about how we're saved by faith alone. That's very true. But at the same time, I think Jude does a good job of balancing out why we can't just use that as an excuse to sin, right? Just to go out and be like, it's cool, I can do what I want. Um, because you can't do what you want, and God loves us and puts certain boundaries, puts certain places out there, tells us where we can and cannot go, where we should not go. We need to have a respect for that, lest we wind up like the people who were saved out of Egypt, right? Or the angels who didn't stay in their proper place, because there's consequences for for breaking those rules and for crossing those boundaries. Now we know that Christ died for our sin, um, that He's taken our punishment for us, that we can ask for forgiveness and get it. However, um, it's still important to respect God's boundary because there's consequences for breaking them, for crossing them, right? So again, we're not Jude and Paul are not standing facing each other fighting. They're standing back to back fighting different heresies. And it's important for us to fight both those heresies in our own hearts as well, because they both exist. I've told you guys before how I don't know if this is a me thing or what, but I I tend to careen wildly from insecurity. I'm a terrible person that can never do anything right. Like I don't know how God's ever gonna make anything out of me. To abject arrogance. I'm one step below a god, right? Those are, those are how I tend to careen between those two mental images of myself. Not only there do I careen between errors, but also in other areas as well, right? Um, I think this is one of those areas of making excuses for myself or legalism. Um, I I don't think I'm uniquely sinful in that. I don't think I'm the only person who struggles with that. Venture that guess. I might be the only one who struggles with that extreme, but there's probably one or two other people on this channel who won't name names who may have the same experience. So that's why it's important. I'm glad you guys did pick Jude to kind of balance out the Galatians and Romans studies, because it's important to look at both elements of this truth, right? So that's how I would apply that this is um, to address the heresies in my own heart, and to make sure that I'm having the proper respect for the boundaries that God has placed in my life. All right, anything you guys want to add before we close out in prayer? All right. Um, let's take prayer requests for closing prayer.